And as always with the Digital Digest, we're always joined by a guest from the industry to talk about something that we've picked up on the podcast in terms of news and updates and stuff that we think is really interesting to explore in a bit more depth, just to really sort of get the inside track on what's going on. And I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Stephen Edgington from Dext. I think possibly the hardest working CTO in the industry by the looks of kind of all of the updates that we see coming out of Dext. And we've admired this guy from afar, so we won't blow too much smoke up Stephen's backside, as it were, today. But just so you know, he has been up since 5 o'clock this morning because he's been doing an APAC update before he's got here. So he's already halfway through the day, whereas I got up about half an hour ago. So I'm fresh as a daisy at the moment, but it's all good. But Stephen, great to meet you, and I wonder if you could give everyone like maybe just a bit of an update and fill in the blanks, because you're not that well known in the industry, apart from we see all of these, like I say, these LinkedIn posts and updates and things that you push out. But it'd be great to sort of understand a bit more about your background and where you came from and how you ended up joining Dext and being involved with them.
Sure. Yeah. Well, look, I'm glad to be here, and it's nice. It's nice to be on this instead of just watching it or listening to it. So I lead. I'm the Chief Product and Technical Officer at Dext. I've been at Dext for 2.5 years. I sit over about 200 people in our engineering, machine learning, support, product teams. I'll go back a little bit in time, so I think it helps paint the picture. I'm a computer science software engineer at heart. So I went to Birmingham University, kind of pursued that passion, and while I was at university, I was actually working in industry as well. So I was working on a production floor, building embedded systems for military and kind of battery systems, and that was kind of like got me into technology and hardware. And at that time, also they were putting in an ERP system, back 2002 timeframe, and this ERP system was like going across all these different divisions in the business where they had Excel spreadsheets, access, separate tools, and fragmented systems to put in like one unifying system. And so I was the IT person helping make that work, getting the accounts work, getting all the data in, and understanding how that worked. And that kind of like led to me actually starting my own business, supporting businesses around the West Midlands on IT projects, from NetSuite to Navision, to Sage. And we ran that business for 14 years, consulting and doing sort of like digital transformations. And becoming an expert in those ERP systems and how those worked resulted eventually in selling to Epicor in the US. And so we grew that business to about 45 people, sold that in 2016 to Epicor, who is a very large ERP player. And then I stayed at Epicor for 7 years as a chief innovation officer there, leading advancing the state of the art and driving AI and projects for that. So got to work with companies like Red Bull Formula One team on how they build the vehicles and the tracks, as well as London Taxi Company, how they built the electric vehicles, and Marshall Aerospace, servicing C-130 Hercules aircraft. So got to kind of like get involved. And then really, so Dext was a little bit different. It was kind of like jump into a completely kind of different industry, but adjacent, and drive AI and focus on that push. So that's my kind of like a little bit into the history before joining Dext. And so with Dext, I've been 2.5 years in, and we've basically just been accelerating features, functionality, learning, in effect, what accounting firms, bookkeepers, and businesses need to drive that automation. And having a small business, and also, like my wife say, botanical artist, self-employed, she's a landlord. So MTD and all this is very close to home. Kind of like it's selfishly building the tools for what I wish I had, and for to use internally as well from my wife's business.
Amazing. Well, I mean, if ever an intro made you feel inferior, that was perhaps the best one ever. And you also dropped in the MTD clanger, so like, kudos to you, Stephen. We tick one box for the day at least. So I mean, we're here, I guess, just to talk about the Dext payments functionality that you've introduced into the products, and that's a partnership with Airwallex. And it'd be really interesting just to understand, what does that bring to Dext? How do you sort of anticipate that looking and feeling now whilst it's in product, but also where that could potentially go in the future? And really, I guess why offer this as a service and a functionality to customers?
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, it goes back to before I joined Dext. The first thing you do, obviously, coming into a business where you've already got, and to be clear, Dext is an amazing team. We've still got a CTO in Bulgaria. That's where the engineering team sits. Very capable team. And we had a product officer before, and I always feel like the product and technology needs to be one. So I'm in there as a CPTO, and as a chief product and technical officer, you have to look at both the kind of like the interplay of the technology and the product. And the first thing I wanted to do when I came into Dext was actually payments. Yeah, it's like spend cards. When you got receipts, like I want to be tapping to pay and basically then associating that to the process. But there was a lot to do before getting there. There's the unification we've done, there's the approvals, there's the mileage, there's like further advance in the AI. So payments was always in the vision. It just wasn't able to kind of like start immediately. And in fact, Dex did payments before some time ago. There was a Dex pay card and lots of history like many times. But what was appealing at Dex as well was the founders had moved on. Private equity had come in, and so like I felt like there's something you can leave your mark here. Yeah, there's like it needs some direction. We need to bring stuff together. So we unified the products from the prepare, from the precision, from the commerce components all into one unit. We don't want 5 client lists. You've got one list of clients. When you're working as an accounting firm, I've got my list, and each client's got different needs, whether it's self-employed or a business. And when you're a business, obviously there's the cost and the sales and the bank, but the next logical part of the workflow is payments. So we had to do lots of work before that. Approvals was a big part of that. Obviously, you can't do payments without kind of clear approval. And what we're trying to do is allow, especially accountants and bookkeepers, to perform this task on behalf of their clients. And if you're doing that, you don't know if an invoice has actually been, if the services have been rendered, if the goods have been received, if there's disputes, etc. So approvals is so key to make sure that what you're paying has been approved by the business if you're going to take that as a component separately. And then we basically went on a process of, once we had approvals working, and we've processed over 1 million approval workflows now, which is like amazing. And once we got that done, then it was kind of moving into the payment space. And then the challenge was, how do you bring this to market in all markets that we serve? So for Dext, we're serving key markets where we've got offices and people on the ground in the UK, in France, in Australia, and in Canada and the US. And so that was one of the challenges was finding a Rails provider. Do we go with Stripe? Do we go with other providers? Adyen, many embedded finance providers. And with every month and year that goes by, embedded finance gets easier. And so AirWallex was actually the natural choice. We looked at lots of different providers, but AirWallex, starting originally in Australia, having then the basis in Singapore, processing over 150 billion in volume, over 180 countries with their FX and wallet capability, was kind of that natural fit, because we could have a partner that can be trusted, and that we can leverage in all markets and go to market with that capability. And so that's basically that led us through the full sort of review process of what's going to be the best platform for our customers that's going to allow us to leverage what we can bring best, the extraction, the accuracy, the control, and the workflow, and then leverage the kind of rails underneath that to be able to do things like BPay in Australia, to do kind of like FPS, and to do kind of Canadian specific transfers as well. So orchestrating all the banks and the layers and the kind of the license registration in each of those regions is what we looked at. Obviously, payments is a very fast moving landscape as well. Everything from, we went down the wallet approach with AirWallex, so that you can put money in, so we don't have the restrictions of open banking. However, the landscape is obviously changing with now the Genius Act, with the Clarity Act coming from the US. So stable coins and kind of those elements are going to potentially change things in the future. But what we're looking to do is build an abstraction there. So as and when that comes in, we've got the ability to support that, so that you can both pay your salaries, missed payments, and invoices, as well as receive money into that, as well as fund cards. So it's all kind of part of a master plan to really complete the workflow and make everything in one place, to allow accountants and bookkeepers to, in effect, support businesses. And then those businesses that are scaled a little bit more, and where they've maybe got internal finance teams, to be able to do that capability themselves.
Yeah. And I mean, you've got this launching in sort of alpha testing next month, and so in a week or so's time, and then we'll move into sort of a beta program with a full launch expected in sort of autumn. What are you looking to sort of tease out in that sort of testing program? And what do the sort of current anticipated sort of workflows look like from a user perspective?
Yeah, well, we actually shared, so on Tuesday and today, and later in North America, I'll be sharing on our updates a a video that our partners can look and watch, and customers can see on how that kind of works. I mean, we've introduced some innovative capabilities like an invoice trust shield concept that looks at things like, okay, once you've set up bank details and we've done like a confirmation of payee check, how do we check that the bank details on the invoice are the same as the details, even if like maybe it's an IBAN number and you're comparing that to like a sort code and account code. Things also with like, how often have you paid this supplier before? Even simple things that aren't included in lots of solutions, like, is this invoice under dispute? Yeah, what are the notes against it? You can't flag some of the GLs, and it's just basic capabilities that people have been asking for that we've included in the flow. So the ability to kind of like ensure and have an audit log over bank detail changes, as well as then see, oh, this has been approved in the business, and then send it for approval of the payment run, to be able to do things like seamlessly get a quote on FX conversions, and then be able to pay efficiently and group invoices and have references. So payments should be a solved problem by now. It's still clunky. It is still clunky. And open banking would be great if it worked all the time, but it doesn't. So I think as an industry, there's still plenty of the workflow to be refined, and that's what we're looking to do. Even things like when you send it for approval now on the Dext mobile app, you can see all the payments that are grouped. You can go into the invoices, see those details. You can remove one. So you might prepare it, but allow the business owner to be able to say, don't pay that one, and this is why they haven't delivered this, or this is in dispute. As well as simple workflows, like when you choose items to put into a batch, we say, hey, there might be a credit note for that supplier that's not been allocated. Do you want to allocate this here? So it's those little details that actually matter when you aren't always in the weeds of the business. And typically, if you're a small business owner and you're processing your invoices yourselves, you know what to pay, you know what's been received, you know what's happening.
Of course, yeah.
As soon as you scale, like having my own business for 40, as soon as you scale, you've got to rely on other people. You've got to have seamless approval workflows, auditability. And if you want to outsource that to somebody, especially when money's moving, you need to make sure you can trust it. So the trust shields are key. The fact that you've paid this person multiple times before and the bank details haven't changed are key. And this insight isn't always visible in these tools. And when you switch in between them, it all matters. So that's the goal. But even things that we've done, which we haven't actually shown this, but we will be soon. But I think it kind of comes down to things I've talked about before, which is around authenticity with AI. So we've actually, as part of the work we have to do in Europe, it's like strong customer authorization, where we make sure that there's a biometric check when you authorize or sign something that you are the person and you're logged in. We've actually extended that on the user now. So if you're in Dext and you're talking to a client, you can press a button on the user to say, can you verify this user? It sends a message to their mobile app and makes them do a biometric verification. So you can check if you're on the phone to them to say, hey, are you really on the phone? Can I just send you a link and I'll just confirm this? Because obviously with voice cloning, with kind of like video cloning as well, that whole trust and can you believe what you see is going to be more important. So, there's lots that we think about in these flows. And to your question, what we're looking to get from the alpha. So we're starting in the UK with select partners that we're working with, and we're looking to get feedback, make sure this is as slick and effective as it can be. There'll be a bank feed into Xero and the QuickBooks, so you can do the reconciliation. We want to make sure that's as seamless as possible. Obviously, we've got things like Dextension, where we can enrich information inside of the GLs where we need to. And that, in effect, allows us to automate even more. So it's all about feedback. One thing I sort of push for when I come into businesses or when we work with developers is typically in a business, the developers are so far away from the end user. If you tell them to build something that what they want, they don't know, because you've got all these layers. You've got support and customer success and account managers. And the goal is, how do you sort of like just play test, put them in the, put them next to the users, get that feedback. So we're all about very fast feedback loops, building environments where you can make changes quickly, and that ultimately builds better solutions for everybody and saves time. And often you watch somebody using software, if you ask them what they want, they won't be able to articulate it always. If you watch what they want and you can ask questions, why have you done that? Why have you clicked that? They're like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. And that's ultimately where we want to make this as slick as possible. And we're starting with, obviously, being able to choose the invoices, set the plan dates, put them into batches. But just like everything else, this all becomes automatable into the future with agents. And you can imagine this is like there's going to be ones that you can put on autopilot Yeah, you always pay these. If they're within this range, you can take some of that decision. It can prepare the payment runs. So and that's in effect where we're going.
And you mentioned, I mean, that payments, isn't really solved yet, and that is perhaps a bit of a surprise. But I guess, one of the challenges with payments is that although it sounds really simple, it's actually quite complex, and particularly when you start to move out of just sort of traditional banking into being able to make and take payments by card and by other lots of other different things. And you mentioned crypto as well. I mean, that's sort of coming back into the fold thanks to Trump. Who knew that would still be a thing. But I guess just going back sort of fundamentally, you talked about obviously how with Air Wallets, you're going to really be sort of using wallets, and that's kind of the core functionality. And there are still challenges around the more traditional banking and obviously open banking as a technology. One of the challenges that we find when it comes to wallets is that sometimes clients don't like them. They don't trust wallets. There's a bit of a risk there potentially, or the perceived risk, but also it's around like keeping on top of funding that wallet and making sure that that's always in funds to be able to make payments and disperse payments. So how are you going to think about sort of tackling some of those challenges? I mean, probably you can't necessarily tackle the trust issues, but more about automating that process so that it's not another manual step to have to fund a wallet and keep feeding cash into something else.
Yeah, look, I think that is one of the, in an ideal world, everything would just work, with open banking and things. But I mean, we know the reality is that doesn't always work. So, a lot of systems have, there's, won't name names, but almost all of them that don't use open banking, and some that do have open banking, even in the GLs, have also, when they go to international, they have to create like a bank account, and that's normally a wallet. I think, leveraging an embedded partner like Air Wallets gives us a lot of benefits, because as they, they've got a large team, as they add new payment rails in different countries, new functionality, we just get the benefits of that. With regards to how do we make it frictionless, it's things like after you've done the approval, if we know there's no funds, it's then sort of like, we know what banks are connected to Xero or QuickBooks, and we know those banks support open banking. You can do initiate a payment initiation through open banking to be able to put the money into that virtual account. So it's as simple as kind of like, transfer into this account, or just press some buttons and authorize the payment into that account. So making it as seamless as possible, and then driving the reconciliation process, is kind of where we're focused on. And this industry, this kind of like technology moves quickly. So if and when an open banking becomes better for different banks, we can in effect unlock that capability. But you still need to be able to support everything else. So I think it will be, there's definitely going to be those. I mean, there's when we look at all of our 12,000 accountants that we work with and 650,000 businesses that are connected, every one of the 330 million invoices that we process needs to be paid at some point.
Yeah.
And we'll look whatever we can to save time to do that process.
Yeah. I wonder if there's an opportunity for an open banking technology that we keep forgetting about, VRPs, to kind of like rear their head and make that process a little bit easier as well.
Yeah, I think, look, there's, we've gone down the route where we did a lot of analysis over all the kind of players. There's various different ways to attack it, and we felt that this is the best one at this point in time, but it doesn't preclude us from adapting into the future. And the cool thing is that the bookkeepers, businesses that leverage Dext payments will be able to benefit from the advances that we kind of complete and continue to include. So that's I think that's the exciting part, is because you don't have to go into a separate app and then have all the setup and the complexity with that. It's just all in one place.
And I mean, we talked briefly before we started this about what were the triggers for kind of going down this sort of end-to-end sort of AP automation kind of route. And you mentioned in your sort of intro that this was something, payments in particular, something you wanted to do when you joined Dext. So it's clearly on your mind at the very least, even if it wasn't necessarily on Dext roadmap a couple of years ago. But I guess the sort of the competitive landscape or the space of sort of AP automation solutions used to be quite distinct. You used to have people like Dext and Auto Entry and other people who did extraction of invoices. Then you had people that did approvals. Then you had another bunch of people that did payments, and so you kind of link those pieces of technology together through APIs or through other functionality, whether it's driven by the GL or not, and did everything distinctly and had that there. And now everyone seems to be all going after the same thing, which is trying to do that whole end-to-end process. Was that something that you had in mind as well, in terms of just reacting to the way that the market was going, and the fact that maybe some people that you partnered with them before are now starting to sort of compete in your kind of your area of expertise, as it were?
Yeah, look, I think it's interesting when you look at like the Zero app marketplace. There's there's thousands of apps, and that's really helped. But there's also you see like Zero's acquired a payments platform. They've kind of got payments in in different regions as well. QuickBooks have got different elements. Approvals is sort of partly in some of the systems. There's separate businesses that just do approvals. So I think it's interesting when you look at the landscape, especially when you've got a very capable team that can sort of like complete the workflows. Part of our mission and vision is all about making time for business and making accounting effortless. And I think we can sort of like stand behind those and go, oh, what is what we're building aligned with our mission and vision? Bookkeeping automation platforms. And yes, we started with receipt bank, receipt farm back in the day, where you put receipts in an envelope and send that to someone to type up on Excel, and then that got converted to AI extracting some of the stuff, and then it kind of evolved. But core AP processing has been a big part of Dext, and approvals and mileage, supplier statements. A lot of these, they came from what the users are sort of asking for. In fact, what we're looking to do now is we shared this in our previous quarterly update, but we're adding in this ability to track time. And it's not to track time to build time, it's to track time where time is used. So it's all about, kind of like, where are you wasting time? And then when we know where you're wasting time, we can then automate further the workflow. So if we know that on this particular client, you're spending lots of time changing all these items, well, why can't we use AI now to sort of like actually infer what you're doing, model that behavior, and then just say like, hey, we've done that for you. It's not like strict rules. We've done that for you, and here are the elements. And so approvals was kind of key. Some of these pillars we think about the kind of end-to-end workflow. Approvals is kind of key for that. Obviously, now we're part of Iris as well. Before Iris's acquisition of Dext, we were looking at, okay, do we go into practice management? Because you kind of expand that way, and then like work papers. So it might feel like, it feels like you're just expanding all over the place, but really it's very focused on like the core workflows. And I think data health and insights, which was the Dext Precision Xavier components, that's all about making sure the data's right. So I like to set the vision as get data in, ensure that it's right, unlock value from data. And that's the kind of key. So getting data in, we just announced like WhatsApp support. Why? We've got a mobile app, but actually some users, it's just easier to forward on WhatsApp. So that's kind of enabled. We've kind of got like, but when we do WhatsApp support, for example, we look at like, how can we see the messages around that message? So like that email trail, where if you forward it on email, you can see the body of the email. But when you forward it on WhatsApp, why can't you see what was like around the text of that? Because someone can add more context. And so when we're looking at like adding these capabilities, we look at kind of the full workflow and work with customers. And again, if you know what's possible with technology, you can sort of like you can exceed people's expectations, as opposed to just doing exactly what they kind of maybe asked for initially. And what you can do now with technology is increase. At Dext, we make over 10 changes. Well, actually, we make probably 20 changes a day to the product with zero downtime when you don't notice. And with AI internally at Dext, we can deliver more. So we've got like a development team of over 100 people, that are now 10x because of AI technology that allows us to do more work. So we can add more functionality, we can build more capability. So supplier statements was one. We added rental statements. We're adding dental statements. People are asking for barrister statements. Everything starts to become more specialized. As you can unlock. Vault was another area that we went into around document intelligence, because where we're going with that is, how do we drive advisory services in the future? You can't do advisory like, there's obviously Jax and Sage Copilot and kind of Intuit's Assist, but when they're working with context that doesn't include the lease on the building or the insurance or the other contracts in the business, they're short-sighted. These AIs are only as good as the data they've got. and
Yeah.
you can't do advisory on data that's half baked. So if you haven't processed all the bookkeeping or the bank isn't reconciled, yeah, so it kind of all comes together. So our view is we sit at the front of the GLs. Yeah, the general ledger is kind of like the tool to be able to capture and record. Yeah, the system of record. Dext is preparing all that, getting the data in, ensuring it's right, making sure it's approved, making sure it's validated. Yeah, and then in effect publishing, and then automating further processes around the payments and around the kind of receiving the payments. So that's where we see the future going, and ultimately then capturing all that data around advisory, Vault on mobile. We shared like a kind of Vault, being able to record in-person meetings, kind of like capturing that context as well. And that all then drives the future advisory. And I think there's a massive, there's plenty for us. We're doing some work we haven't released yet for coming up for XeroCon in September over like how we apply agents in Dext and AI. And I think that's going to be a massive unlock next as well.
Yeah, amazing. We'll come back to the AI thing in a minute and Vault and various bits, but just one other thing. I mean, we're increasingly seeing e-invoicing becoming more and more prevalent, and particularly in some of the markets that you guys operate in. Australia, Europe. Obviously, there's consultation here in the UK around that as well. And I guess quite a lot of people would sort of perceive e-invoicing as being a challenge to Dext because it takes away kind of some of that core functionality of extracting either paper or digital invoices and things. So where does that position Dext, and what are you having to sort of do to start to think about accommodating that? Again, people like Xero have already made acquisitions in this space, and other people have done various things, and I guess what challenges and opportunities does e-invoicing present for Dext?
Yeah, well, look, I think there's lots of changes going on around the world. So we already support e-invoicing in Australia, and I think there's two ways to look at the e-invoicing. Ones that have been introduced softly, and those that have been imposed. And you have to be mandated for them. And in France, it's a good example where France are introducing continuous tax collection. So in effect, you have to be registered with their PDP, with the government, and once you're registered, you receive and send invoices to the government, and you have to tell them when you've paid the invoice, when you have to send the invoices to them. So it's kind of like
it's the same as Brazil, isn't it? They do that in Brazil.
When you pay kind of quarterly VAT returns, it's kind of like every individual invoice. I've accepted that, I've rejected that, I've paid that. So the problem actually moves because now invoices just appear. Yeah, like you don't actually always see the physical invoice. So fraud, and that's going to be potentially something to explore. And also now you have to manage the statuses of like, are you going to accept that one? Are you going to reject that one? Who's doing that work? And it doesn't remove the requirement to still do approvals, to still do categorization. And while the extraction is sort of solved, I mean, there's actually in France, there's multiple versions of the German FactureX format. So, there's just like EDI.
Of course.
EDI was going to solve everything, and it didn't. I mean, when I was at Epicor, we bought an EDI company. And EDI, there's no standard; it's all mapping. So at least with e-invoicing, there is some standards, but there's different versions. Some that include line items, some that don't. But still, how you map that is important. You want to have the same product code if you do an inventory with your system. Yeah. So there's plenty to do on the PO matching, on the line item, on aggregation, on categorization, on handling. The problems just move. So yes, the extraction is sort of semi-solved. Apart from saying France, it doesn't apply to all businesses. It doesn't apply to receipts. It doesn't apply to invoices outside the country. So you're going to end up with, there's pure play PDPs that have stood up that can process just e-invoicing, but that's only 60, 70% of the workload. You still then have to process the other 30% and the expenses. And to get everyone in the country to change their point of sale systems and receipt systems is not going to happen. And it's already been delayed multiple times. So I think the governments that introduce this slowly, to sort of like get adoption. I mean, ultimately, it's a bit like MTD. My personal opinion is government should give you a tax rebate. Yeah, if they want to drive this technology, you'd go a lot faster. If you adopt it, you get some benefit as opposed to just a stick and no carrot. But it is different. We are we are connected to people. Providers, so we can sort of like plug in for the new changes in Malaysia, Singapore, and others that will do. But it does sort of change the workflow because sometimes you don't want the e-invoices going straight into the GL. You want them coming where you can triage them first, because you want to make sure that they're correct. You want to drive the approvals. You want to drive that process. So that's what we're sort of like. We're looking at the workflow where Dext receives the e-invoices. We've actually added now the ability to create quotes and sales invoices in Dext. So on the mobile, you can do that, and that creates these FactorX invoices that are compliant. So you don't need to have, kind of like a separate tool. And we also allow you to send in a Word, PDF, Excel version of the sales invoice, and we convert that to an e-invoice to drive, to reduce the change required for some people. It's like, a moving landscape on regulatory changes, e-invoicing, e-reporting, digital sales. So I mean, that's what we do that for.
Do you think that this particular push on e-invoicing across multiple territories is going to enhance this requirement to kind of do this supply chain verification, which we've seen in dribs and drabs in various technologies and various products, where I guess you're kind of already doing some of that in terms of validating bank accounts, but VAT registration numbers don't get validated in lots of systems. For example, being actually able to verify that yes, that business in Germany definitely exists and it's not made up.
Yeah, we've actually just added VAT extraction and verification and name checks. Yeah, so that's just been released for the UK market, and that helps us do more as well. Like that helps you.
Not for the EU yet, though.
Not for the EU. Although as soon as we announced that on Tuesday, we had all of our colleagues in South Africa and Ireland saying, "What about customers there? Sorry, what about us?" So the capability is there to do the same thing. It just requires a separate system to validate too. So that's the problem. Is everyone's got their own different format, and also when you do VAT checks, for example, like you might have a group VAT structure that's different to the name. So you've got to build the kind of validation there. And if you receive European invoices, you might have two VAT numbers on, and you've got to cross-check which one's the UK one and handle reverse charge. So there's lots of complexities, but ultimately we are looking at where do we make the most impact. Another thing we added were things around prepayment automation. Yes, like the hot new thing on the list, but it's again, how do you take a workflow where someone used to publish a document and then go in and create manual journals to sort of amortize that over a different period? How do you just have a checkbox and automate that process? And the biggest restriction we have is when the GLs don't support the APIs that we need. Like a common question, things like on Xero, why can't we associate an invoice to a project? Because it doesn't support that in the API, but it's one of our top requested features. And again, it really holds Xero's projects module back, because people, if you need to use projects and you want to allocate cost to projects, you kind of want to use automation tools to associate them and not limit yourself to tracking categories. So I think there's a lot of like opportunities out there, and there's a lot of countries out there. We've got a lot of customers across multiple countries, but we do try and focus on our UK, France, Canadian and Australian core, and obviously, but given we're the almost connected platform on Xero and QuickBooks, wherever Xero and QuickBooks are, we tend to follow. And our customers sort of like then come up with the requirements in those markets, and it's always a balanced resource.
I'm very conscious of time, but we did drop the AI clanger, so we've got to at least cover that very briefly. Again, I know that you've talked about things like NPCs and the opportunity with those and how that might change people's experiences and the way that you interact with technologies. It used to be all about APIs, and now it's switched out. And obviously we've got a whole bunch of things happening with agent experiences. We've got people like Digits in the US bringing a whole different approach to general ledger and integration. And of course, ChatGPT's just launched agents functionality in their product for and practically giving it away as well, which is like, it's outrageous, really. And I guess finally as well, you guys have also introduced a whole bunch of technologies to try and make sure that if people are creating spurious invoices or receipts using AI technologies, that can hopefully be identified in the product and reduce that risk of fraud, which is also quite amazing and really interesting to see. But I guess again, I know you'll nerd out on this, Stephen, but where do you see this having a significant impact for Dext, and what kind of opportunities is that going to present for you guys in maybe the next 6 months or so?
Yeah. So I'll step back. So it's like in development, I think this is where we're seeing the biggest change. So you'll see like the news about Lovable, I think now is the fastest growing company, that was 8 months to hit 100 million ARR. And then we had Cursor, which was like 12 months to hit something crazy as well. So we're seeing this explosion, especially in the development and engineering space, because it allows us to take like our 100 engineers and go, right, now you're 10x. Now we've got 1,000 engineers. Now it's not exactly like that, but you can go a lot faster. You can prototype, and typically when we're using, say, like these development tools, you can plug in MCPs for like Playwright and kind of accessing the database and accessing your tracking systems. And so now you've got this ability to be working very efficiently across multiple different tools. In fact, inside Dext, we've built our own agents that help our sales and support teams be able to look at like user voice ideas and help desk articles and intercom support questions. And so it allows, like, within 10 seconds of a account manager asking a question about how does this work in Dext, or my partner's struggling with this thing, they can get an instant response from an AI agent that responds. And we've orchestrated that with tools. So like we are using them internally, how we run the business, we're using them how we build the software. And obviously then we're looking at how do we unlock this capability for our customers to do that. So, we've obviously, like you said, MCP is just an extension, and people want to know what MCP means, but some people make an analogy of it's like USB. You plug, it's like everything you can plug in, like USB just works, like you plug it in and it works. I don't like that analogy as much, because while the idea is that everything's got the same socket, it doesn't work as well. I prefer the analogy of Bluetooth. And Bluetooth, you can kind of connect it. You can connect multiple things on Bluetooth. It mostly works, but sometimes doesn't work. And I think that's MCP. It mostly works and sometimes doesn't work. And the problem is you want solid, an API integration is a solid integration because it's programmatic. An MCP one is kind of like, hey, these are possible tools you can call. And agentic systems can basically decide which tool to call. And there's many scenarios where like you can't give it too many tools. If you plug too many systems in, imagine a firm in the future or a business in the future where you've just got this one AI agent in the middle and everything's an MCP. And you just tell it what you want and it sort of like tries to work out what to call. It will get confused. And it will call the wrong thing. And there's many examples of people trying to build software with these kind of replit tools and things where it's all gone wrong. And they spent many times, many hours. In fact, there's a big one just recently from Jason Lemick from SaaStr, who had spent about 12 days building software on Replit, and it deleted his production database. And that's this AI calling tools and not knowing what to call when and what the impacts are. But how we think about it at Dext is, people think, oh, Dext isn't using the latest AI. We have multiple models. We have internal, our own small language models. We're using external models. It's a very kind of complicated orchestration to do the extraction of line items and details and invoices, etc. But where we're looking next, and the question of like in the next 6 months where we're going, how do we model what the bookkeeper's doing? There's many cases where like maybe you extract an invoice and we have the reference number, but for whatever reason you need to change the reference number, add a postfix number because that ties to the location of the restaurant, and you need that on the bank feed to be able to know which bank it relates to, because you've got one version of Xero, but you've got invoices from multiple locations and you can't see the tracking category, so you make that change. Or maybe you change the description to be the first line of the delivery address if it's a construction site. So there's all these things our users do, and we record every change that they make. And so we're looking at how do we feed that to language models to not just do the extraction, but to model the behavior. And then it changes the whole use case to be more of a reviewer process as a, you don't make changes. We track all the changes, and that's a measure. And in fact, I tasked the team to save 1 million hours this year. That's what we want to do. We want to save 1 million hours of people's time. So first of all, we need to measure where is the time taken. And next, we need to basically automate that process. And, Dext today has sort of rules around supplier rules, but those are too rigid. And models, this flexibility of you just tell us what you want. What do you want to do? Natural language. And so that's what we'll be introducing, is this ability to sort of like just natural language explain the rules that you want to apply, but with the guardrails and the auditability and the versioning and all those things around it. And that's kind of like where we go. And I think every system is going to be moving that towards that route as well. And so MCPs, we will be exploring, with the right partners. I mean, lots of partners don't know what it means. APIs, we've got Zapier. You can automate systems with Zapier, but really there are opportunities where you can start to sort of like maybe manage your firm, manage the allocation of people to tasks and workflows, if you could have an LLM query, okay, what work needs to be done, what deadlines, obligations for MTD need to be processed, who's got them, help me work out a more schedule. This person's off this week, they're going to get married, they're going on paternity, etc. Give me a plan, and then it can just like drive the system through MCP. Yeah, so I think that's where you'll start to get to, is the AI is helping orchestrate the work, but they need good tools. You don't want I mean, ChatGPT agent is a good example. You don't want that reading a folder, extracting invoices, extracting the details, and putting it into the GL with an MCP. You could say, well, Dext could be replaced with an AI agent that's got access to the GL, right? It all falls apart when you can't guarantee the accuracy. And that's the difference, is you've got to use the right tool for the job. And I talked about this in the kind of like the global product update around, evolution. There wasn't just one winner. Yeah, there's specialists and generalists, and the generalists are like the ChatGPT agents, the Manuses of the world, and all these new agents that you'll see. Comet from Perplexity, a new browser agent that's coming out. So there's just going to be more and more of these agents, and these are the kind of generalists that are going to help orchestrate things. And then you're going to have specialist tools that you use. And those specialist tools are where it's going to be very sort of vertical specific to industry. And that's sort of like what Dext is doing around bookkeeping automation. And so, we'll be talking more about those types of things pretty soon.
Amazing. Well, we've massively overrun, and I could probably carry on talking to you for about another hour, Stephen. But I'm sure, like many people, you've got work to do. I've definitely got some work to do, and I'm sure people watching and listening have probably got work to do as well. I do have one final question. I mean, you mentioned Lovable and Replit and some of the other things as well as out there, which I guess is allowed not just people like yourselves to be able to code and accelerate your capabilities, but it also means that people like myself can also now start to experiment with these things, and that kind of gives people within firms, whether they're bookkeepers, accountants, whatever, agency to effectively maybe like modify the tools that they've got. Do you guys perceive that as being a bit of a risk or a bit of a challenge to Dext, in terms of, obviously in the past we were always just served by developers within a software company creating functionality and features that we'd requested, and sometimes that happened quickly, sometimes it happened slowly. Now, of course, potentially we could go off and use one of these tools and go, right, that thing that I wanted 10 years ago, I can now just go and build it myself. Is that a challenge to you guys?
I think it's a challenge. I think it raises the bar, because now people can articulate what they want better. I mean, we use it for our product managers, for our designers, but if you can now just vibe code up a kind of like, this is what I want. This is what I want my client portal to be. Yeah. This is what I want our kind of experience for X, Y, and Z to be. You can do that now. Now, going from this is what I want to hacking together a prototype to actually putting that live is a very different thing. But to kind of go to the kind of that prototyping stage, yes, that's definitely kind of accelerated, and that raises the bar for everyone in the industry, because it just means everyone's expectations have increased. We did hackathon actually with Iris and all the management team before, and it's having everybody understand what is possible allows you to go, well, why does it take so long then? Why does that project take so long? Why does that other project take so long? So it increases the pressure and the expectation. It's also dangerous because good quality software does take time to do properly. Yeah, you have to handle all these edge cases and processes. But no, I think it's good. There was a podcast that I was listening to, or a talk that was being done by, I think it was Shopify, and they were saying that the biggest growth of cursor use, which is considered a developer tool, was actually outside of development. It was in their sales and marketing, because you can use this tool plugged into MCPs to do market research, to do kind of analysis. You can kind of say, go look at all the other firms, in a 50-mile radius from me. What are they charging? What do the websites look like? What are they talking about? Who are the main people they're advertising or with? And you can start to use these tools outside of that. So I would absolutely say, use the tools, play with them, the replits, the lovables, the cursor components, but you just got to make time to experiment. And the problem is the pace of change is so fast. You could spend all day doing this, and we could be talking all day on this. So we better wrap up. But I think lean into it, and don't think because these are developer tools that you can't leverage them. Start with simple ones, but the people that are going to have the most agency are those that know what the business needs. And sometimes that's not the developers. Sometimes that's the business people that aren't developers, but they can tell you exactly what they want, and they can always tell you what they want when they can see what they asked for. It's I didn't mean that. Change it. I didn't mean that. Change it. And then you get to a kind of an endpoint that's yeah, that's exactly what I want. And if you can take that then to another team or to your internal stakeholders or your internal team and validate it, you can go much faster because you're not making the mistake. It just compresses the timeline to kind of value. And I think that's what we've seen in the industry. Everyone's doing more. Everyone's adding more bits because you can go faster. The pace of innovation has increased with AI.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed talking to you, as I'm sure you could probably tell. And as I said, we could probably just go on for hours and hours and hours. But we do have a a conceptual time constraint here, at least. I mean, I'm sure if Ryan's watching, he'll be shouting at me because we're already 15 minutes over. But just a reminder for anyone that is watching still, is that if you want more of this, we're always going live on a Thursday in the morning, and we do of course have the podcast going out every Monday. And you can sign up to our newsletter and catch all the latest news and bits and pieces that are going out which comes out on a Friday. So it's your nice wrap up to the end of the week. But Stephen, really pleased to have finally got the chance to probably speak to you and meet you. And thank you for your time and effort. And as we've said on the podcast a few times, I think you're probably one of the people that's had the most impact on one of the products that we talk about a lot, in terms of like development, features, functionality that we're seeing coming out there. So long way may it continue, and you clearly have a very clear view of where you want to go in the future. So congratulations to being so successful with that, and let's see what the future holds.
Yeah, it's my team, not me, but yeah, thank you anyway. And great to be on. Glad we got the time. Catch you again later.
Super. Cheers.